going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. Cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Why were there FBI in the Capitol dressed as Trump supporters prior to the doors opening? And does it have anything to do with this document? Let's take a look. For those that don't know, the deep state is comprised of pillars. That's what props the whole thing up. The intelligence community, the financial system, which is endless cash flow. We got a central bank that doesn't even answer to our own government. The media, which is every MSM outlet out there, including journalists. That's what most people don't put together, is journalists are also tied to this whole apparatus. They're activists. They're not actually journalists. They're activists posing as journalists. You got the DOJ, which is where all the lawfare for Trump and for Americans comes from. All of the lawfare comes from the DOJ. The military-industrial complex. That's what this whole thing is. This whole playbook for January 6th, the stolen election, the censorship, it all comes from the military-industrial complex. That's what birthed the censorship-industrial complex. Then you got big tech, which is part of the censorship-industrial complex. When you are on your phone, what you're holding in your hand is a military-grade information weapon. When you start to realize that we are in an information war, you'll really start to grasp what kind of situation we're dealing with. So big tech, the censorship industrial complex, it was made to control speech and control the conversation in society. It worked for a long time. It still does to an extent. Then you got education and academia. That speaks for itself. You got the NGOs and civil society. The NGOs and the political action organizations are what produced this document that I'm about to show you. It bypasses voters when you deal with all of these NGOs and you get stuff done through the NGOs and you use influencing of policy and activism from these NGOs that are sponsored by these mega billionaires that are completely propped up and government made. So then you got Antifa and the other activist networks, which are the boots on the ground and the ones that sway public perception. They disrupt at a street level, intimidation to, like, let's just say some of the judges and people that might be holding up the process. Well, Hollywood and entertainment is the last pillar of the deep state. So now you have an idea of what makes the deep state up. Let's go over the document. And for those of you that don't like to wear a tinfoil hat, I'm telling you, it's better to wear a tinfoil hat than it is to wear a blindfold. Start asking questions, because we've all been lied to, and don't feel ashamed to admit out loud, yep, I was duped as well, because we all have been. So here we go. This document was put out 3 weeks before the election. October 14th, 2020 is the last update on this document before it got sent out. And when I mean it got sent out, it went out to all of the radical leftness. All of this apparatus, the allies, and every single facet of the deep state, the media, the people on the ground, journalists, everybody got this playbook weeks ahead of the election. And what this playbook did was started sowing the seed of, he's going to contest this election. It's going to be a fight. It's not going to be, hunky-dory election night. We're going to count them. No, this is going to go on for weeks. This whole thing prepares them for that. But listen to the language in this document. And I want to remind everybody, this was COVID. We were going through COVID, and the same people that told us COVID came from a bat were the same people that, put out these documents and told us the election wasn't stolen. Listen to some of this language. This is just in the preface. We believe in a close election. Trump is likely to try to overturn the results of the election. Many people are skeptical that it'll come to this, but they argue that Trump will try to save face by claiming the election was rigged against him. This is weeks before the election. The premise of this guide is that we should take Donald Trump's threat that he won't accept the results of the election at face value and prepare for a protracted conflict after Election Day. Pleading with courts and Republican officials to do the right thing is akin to continuing to play a board game that the opposition has set on fire. The language here is apocalyptic type language. All right. Trump's most dangerous weapon is paralysis induced by shock and chaos. The purpose of this guide is to help our readers, from ordinary people to Democratic Party officials at every level, prepare psychologically and materially for a high-stakes battle to defend our constitutional government. Very apocalyptic, end of the world. If we don't defeat this guy, we're losing everything. This document was put together by 3 individuals, which are all tied in deep to all of these political action committees. They ran on the Bernie Sanders campaigns. They helped get Alvin Bragg and Larry Krasner in Pennsylvania, the radical left DAs elected. They are all tied to that. When you start to see who funds all this stuff, it all ties back to the same group of billionaires that are tied to all of the nefarious stuff we found with USAID. Just like everything else, it's a complex web of PACs and NGOs. The document then goes on to give us the key dates after the election. You have Election Day, November 3rd, then December 8th is the safe harbor deadline, December 14th is the deadline for governors to report the election results, and the Electoral College meets. January 3rd is the new Congress. January 6th is when Congress counts the Electoral College votes. Congress convenes in a joint session held in the House chambers to count Electoral College votes and choose the next president. That's what January 6th is. That is the last time that Trump will be able to contest the election. That's why it's a key date. Again, this is a playbook for everything leading up to that, so it includes a lot. And I'm going to skim over a lot of it, but it's important to understand where they're coming from and the fight or flight mode that they're in. Let's get started. Understanding the system, how the United States actually elects presidents. Skip down, we all kind of know that. But Donald Trump knows that he's losing. According to the polls, he's likely to lose both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, possibly by huge margins. Assuming the polls are correct, it's already sowing the seeds. We have heard this time and time again that the polls are the problem. They're fake polls. How many times have we seen polls and we're like, that didn't pan out at all? Then it goes on to say, that isn't the country we live in. The combination of an arcane system by which Electoral College votes are cast and counted, the administration of ballots and elections by individual counties instead of by the federal government, and a global pandemic make our system vulnerable to a candidate like Trump who will do anything to win. It's really painting Trump out to be the guy that they think he is. This is a nightmare scenario. Trump disrupts and delays. They go on to name the key swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that ended up being a problem because those states have Democratic governors and Republican-led state legislatures. When the votes go in, before they go to Congress, they get counted and approved by the state legislatures. And the problem is that most of these rules were changed in these states because of COVID. Illegally changed. They changed the election procedures in these states. Election Day. Unlike most recent presidential elections, we most likely won't know the winner of the 2020 race on election night. They're saying it right there. The reason is simple. because dramatically more people will vote by mail in this election as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The same people that released COVID on us are here warning their Democratic voters that because of the pandemic and the mail-in ballots that we have to use, we're not going to have the result on election night, even though we need to have the result on election night. Just because we're in a pandemic doesn't make it a special situation. Plain and simple, it just doesn't. We knew what they were doing. That's why we were protesting and we were so loud about it, because we knew that they were doing this illegally. This was funny business, plain and simple. In recent presidential elections, it's been possible to declare one of the candidates the winner on election night because there haven't been enough outstanding mail-in ballots in battleground states to affect the outcome of the election. This year, however, the mail-in ballots will be a large enough share of the total votes that a candidate could win the election day count but lose by a large margin once all of the ballots are counted. And it's almost certain that Biden will win a substantially larger share of mail-in ballots than Trump. And that's exactly what we saw. We woke up the next morning and there were charts that just went straight up and over. It just didn't make any sense. We knew what was going on. 4 a.m. ballot dumps. They all go to Biden. What is that about, dude? We knew it. We saw it. They used COVID to trigger the mail-in ballots and change the election procedures in these states surrounding mail-in ballots. They changed the procedures illegally, which is why the state legislatures were so important. That's why they mentioned them here, because those were the legislatures that could then possibly slate a different set of electors and send them to Congress, those that they believed weren't fraudulent. Assuming a close election, it's likely that there will be enough mail-in ballots to make it impossible to know the winner until they're all counted in the days and weeks after November 3rd, making it nearly impossible to declare a winner on election night. Again, they're preparing. This is 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before. They're preparing people for what's about to happen. Although we, as the normal voter at the time, we're just assuming that we're going to have an election day as normal. Yes, there were mail-in ballots, but we would know by that night who won. And it was Trump until the next morning. The blue shift. In recent elections, Democrats have been far more likely than Republicans to vote by mail. As a result, the vote count shifts in favor of Democratic candidates as mail-in ballots are counted after the election. The phenomenon is called the blue shift. For the 2020 election, many more Democrats than Republicans have requested mail-in ballots, strongly indicating that Democrats will again be more likely to vote by mail than Republicans. Consequently, in a close election, it's likely that the November 3rd count will show Trump leading and that Biden will take the lead as mail-in ballots are counted. They prepared these folks for exactly what happened. This was the playbook. Again, this is all going out to every single pillar of the deep state. And the media had headlines. They had articles written. They were ready to go. Let me continue here because this gets so interesting. Let's go to January 6th. January 6th, and this is still part of the section about how presidents get elected, so it just explains how this works. In our Constitution, the power belongs to Congress, who finally gets elected to the presidency based on the electors that were slated from the state legislatures that were sent to Congress. That's what happens on January 6th. Some of the language here. If the election is disputed, the final battle will be fought in Congress. How does Congress resolve disputes over Electoral College votes? Skip down a little bit. The President of the Senate shall, this is in our Constitution, the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all certificates and the votes shall then be counted. That says it right there in our Constitution that the President of the Senate, which is the Vice President, Mike Pence at the time, the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, Open all certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. Unfortunately, the law is famously convoluted and virtually untested. Legal scholars disagree on how to interpret it. So how does Congress resolve disputes over Electoral College votes? The answer is we just don't know. But it's likely that politics and public perception will play a key role in shaping how Congress and the Supreme Court interpret the Electoral College Act and the 12th Amendment. That line right there is a signal to the media and journalists. Public perception. It is likely that politics and public perception will play a key role in shaping how Congress and the Supreme Court interpret the Electoral Count Act and the 12th Amendment. All right, that's a signal to the people in the media because they need to know how to fight this thing that's going on, this contest from Donald Trump. Trump must not be allowed to win an illegitimate victory under any circumstances. To stop him, Democrats will have to be prepared to go as far as Republicans in casting aside political norms and playing political hardball, something they've failed repeatedly to do when it matters the most. Again, this is very, very extreme behavior and wording. It really paints the picture that the Republicans are already cheating. Like when they are the ones that were cheating, they are painting the picture that it's the Republicans that were cheating. There's no limit to what Trump will do to win. If Democrats aren't willing and ready to go as far as Trump will to win, they are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past and suffer the very real consequences. Boy, oh boy. So now we're at the second part, how to deal with the threat, understanding it and how to deal with it, how Trump could disrupt the election. The most direct threat to the Electoral College process now comes from the President of the United States himself. That's a quote at the top of this section. The gravest threat to the election, the President himself. If Trump and Republicans attempt to overturn the results of the election, we know what playbook they will use. Skip to the third one. Convince Republican legislatures to overturn the results of the election by appointing fraudulently competing slates of Trump electors in order to throw the election to Congress. So they're saying that the Republicans will overturn the results from the states that had illegally changed election procedures, which this is the right process to go through. If you don't trust the election procedures and they were changed illegally, it's up to the legislatures to submit the electors that are not fraudulent. It is up to them to do the right thing, and that's what they were doing. And this document is preparing these people that that is illegal and that's not right, and that this is a counterplay, an apocalyptic counterplay by the Republicans to try and steal the election. They were doing the right thing. These electors were not lawfully slated. Skip down a little bit more. It talks more about Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Again, this is weeks ahead of the election. They knew where the problem was going to be. They knew it, and they stated it multiple times. All three states have a Democratic governor who is responsible for reporting to Congress which candidate won the state. Pennsylvania and Michigan have Democratic secretaries of state who are responsible for compiling and reporting the final vote. Wisconsin has a 6-member elections commission that is split 3-3 by party and is responsible for compiling and reporting the final vote count. Each state also has a Republican-controlled legislature that, for Trump to overturn the results of the election, would have to vote to appoint fraudulent Trump electors before December 14th. Again, they wouldn't be appointing fraudulent Trump electors. They would be appointing electors that are trustworthy versus the ones that came from the mail-in ballot scheme that we knew was not legal. These three states in general pointed out right here in this playbook. Let's skip to voter suppression. This is a scare tactic kind of language here. So Trump has supercharged the Republicans' voter suppression strategy. In 2016, Trump's campaign ran a massive digital misinformation and disinformation program intended to convince Democrats not to vote. Since COVID-19, Trump and the Republican Party have launched a scorched earth legal campaign to block the expansion of mail-in voting. Everybody was talking about the mail-in ballots being a problem prior to the election. Every country that has mail-in ballots has problems in their election. Trump supporters will instigate chaos and violence at the polls. Trump and his allies will immediately claim that it's actually Black Lives Matter or Antifa or some other convenient scapegoat that is instigating violence, and that his supporters are acting in self-defense. Right-wing media will amplify these assertions while mainstream media draws false equivalencies between right-wing militia and progressive protesters. They're telling these people that it's going to be right-wing militia that are at the polls intimidating voters, and we're going to blame it on BLM and Antifa, which BLM and Antifa were the ones causing chaos that year. They were the ones intimidating people at voter booths and judges and so on. Action steps before the election. This is where it gets wild. Pressure Republicans. Make your Republican colleagues take sides publicly. Republicans should state plainly that every ballot should be counted, that mail-in ballots are safe and secure, that concerns about fraud are unwarranted, and that Republican legislatures in swing states should not intervene in the election. Paying lip service to a peaceful transition of power isn't enough. Republicans must make specific, concrete commitments to ensuring that this is a fair and free election. They want them to submit ahead of time. They want them to submit. That is submission that they are begging for there. They want to punish you into submission ahead of time. That way you have words that you need to stand on later, because they will use it against you in the media. Remain calm and challenge misinformation and disinformation. Republicans are spreading lies and conspiracy theories about voter fraud and barriers to voting. Only repeat information about voting that comes from credible sources, their sources. Prepare for a contested election. Share this document with your friends, family, and people in your community. Read and discuss it together. This was out all over Twitter and in all of the Telegram channels back then. This is all a ridiculous conspiracy theory and a transparent attempt to undermine faith in the election. But if Trump convinces enough people that it's true, he will create an opening for Republican state legislatures to steal the election. If Trump convinces enough people that it's true, he will create an opening for Republican state legislatures to steal the election. The legislatures that needed to send the correct electors, not the fraudulent ones, okay? So then, the key period during which Trump can undermine public faith in the integrity of elections is between Election Day and December 8th, while ballots are still being counted. December 8th is the deadline to certify the results of the election. The more chaos Trump can create while the ballots are being counted, the more likely people are to believe that the results are fraudulent. That's when the censorship started. We were being censored like crazy. And the mainstream media was in full swing, calling us crazy conspiracy theorists. Donald Trump was leading some kind of movement against the federal government. If the election night totals show Trump in the lead because Democrat mail-in ballots haven't been counted yet, he will likely demand that those results be certified and that the election be called in his favor. As mail-in ballots are counted and Biden takes the lead, Trump will accuse Democrats of fraud and double down on his demand for the election night results to be certified. That's amazing. That's truly amazing. If the election night totals show Trump in the lead because Democratic mail-in ballots haven't been counted yet, he will likely demand that those results be certified and that the election be called in his favor. You're telling me that it's wrong to say, hey, it's election day. It's the end of election day. Those are all the votes. That's what's counted. No. We have to wait for their mail-in ballots to come in the next morning and get dumped in and shoot Biden ahead. Of course he's going to ask that it's certified. Moving on. There will also be situations where administrative barriers create delays in Trump's favor. For example, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Pennsylvania changed its voting rules and adopted a process for counting a large number of paper ballots. It says right here, they admit it right there, out loud admitted. We want to be clear. What matters most in this period is not how many ballots are counted, but public perception of the integrity of the election. That's in bold font, and that is clearly signaling to the mainstream media that it's up to them to keep the public perception of the integrity of the election at the forefront. Okay, Republican legislatures can send slates of electors to Congress even if Trump loses the popular vote in their state, and state electors can even meet on their own and send a record of their votes to Congress independent of the governor or state legislature. Republican legislatures will be far less likely to intervene in the election if a huge majority of Americans understand that Trump lost and is trying to steal the election. That means that public perception needs to be painted in a way that looks like Trump is trying to steal the election. They completely pushed that narrative. Even though what the legislatures were doing was correct, they pushed it as if the Republicans were cheating. Moving on, even federal judges and Supreme Court are sensitive to public pressure. And if it is clear that the country is unified in outrage at what Trump is doing, it's unlikely that even conservative judges will save his doomed campaign. Okay, this is calling on the activists to provide political pressure to the politicians. That's straight up what that is. Okay, that is a dog whistle to the activists saying this is what your job is, to provide this pressure on these federal judges and Supreme Court and these politicians. Okay, Republicans will pressure the Democratic governor to appoint Trump electors to the Electoral College. Republicans didn't pressure, it was the fraudulent electors. Like, they changed election procedures illegally, but they didn't want to talk about that because this was do or die. You had to get Trump elected. And all of these allies and all of these factions, the media and all the representatives, they were all in line, in lockstep in this. So if Trump takes the lead by preventing all of Biden voter ballots from being counted, the Democratic governor in Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin must appoint Biden electors to the Electoral College. If they cave to Republican pressure not to, we lose and Trump gets to steal the election. Again, it's do or die for these people. Not let's take the honest route and just, handle this honestly. How will we know Biden won if all the votes aren't counted? First, appointing electors doesn't mean that Biden will be awarded the state's electoral college votes when the votes are counted. It is up to Congress to count the votes and make the final decision about who won the state. Appointing Biden's electors, even though it is not yet certain that Biden won, is an unusual action to take, but it is fully justified and necessary if the count hasn't been completed because Trump and his allies deliberately prevented the ballots from being counted. In that scenario, the only responsible thing for a governor to do is give Congress more time to consider which candidate is the rightful winner by giving it the option to award the state electoral votes to Biden. Okay, it's saying it right here. Appointing Biden electors, even though it's not yet certain that Biden won, is an unusual action to take, but it is fully justified and necessary if the count hasn't been completed, because Trump and his allies deliberately prevented the ballots from being counted. It goes on. More of this language. Even brutal dictatorships hold sham elections and report vote counts that purportedly show the dictator winning a majority of the votes. That doesn't mean that the dictator is democratically elected. The only ballot count that counts is the one that's fair and free. If it becomes impossible to hold a fair and free election because Trump disrupts the ballot count, Democrats must take every available action to prevent him from usurping the presidency. This phase of the fight is likely to be confusing, but the most important thing to remember is that Congress makes its final decision about which electoral college votes to count and which ones to discard. The Constitution gives Congress the power to decide if a slate of electors was legally or illegally appointed. There are three important scenarios that may result in Congress needing to use its power to settle disputes about electors. The second scenario says, no matter who wins the election or what the governor does, the state legislature may convene and vote to appoint a second competing slate of electors who will then vote for the candidate to which they are pledged. That's completely normal when this was all a sham in the beginning. Like the procedure changes were not lawful. Action steps to take between November 3rd and November 14th. Call out Republican fraud. Cry foul as soon as the Trump and Republicans attempt to disrupt the vote count and appoint fraudulent electors. Cry foul. Man, how much did we hear it back then? Explain that what Trump and his allies are doing is an attempt to steal the election. Protect ballots. Democrats must do everything to the limit of their power to ensure a full and accurate count of all ballots, in person and mail-in. The mail-in ballots were the key. That's why they keep on repeating it. State legislatures. Remember, this is the action steps to take between the 3rd and the 14th. State legislatures use every procedural tactic available to stop Republicans from voting to appoint Trump electors. This goes into the lawfare side of things. So use your procedural tactics to stop the Republicans from voting to appoint Trump electors. If it's not possible to stop them, try to delay votes until the December 14th deadline has passed. If you can't delay the vote past the deadline, shut down the chambers by assisting nonviolent protesters in taking over the building. Did you read that? This is in each state that there might be a contest. You know, they mentioned Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But it's right there. Use every procedural tactic available to stop Republicans from voting to appoint Trump electors. If it's not possible to stop them, try to delay the votes until the December 14th deadline has passed. If you can't delay the vote past the deadline, shut down the chambers by assisting nonviolent protesters in taking over the building. If you can't stop the vote, boycott it or deny quorum. At the very least, signal the vote isn't legitimate. Then investigations. State and local authorities should open investigations into right-wing militias and illegal actions by Republicans to suppress the vote and prevent ballots from being counted. And it goes on for people everywhere. It gives a protest, organize, hold teach-ins, political education, local elected officials. This talks to everybody, academia, everything. Big tech was a big deal because of the censorship. They knew exactly what to censor based on what the information that was being told here. It was a playbook. They were ready. So anyways, it goes on. Your state legislatures. Call your state legislatures and tell them not to appoint fraudulent electors to the Electoral College. This is just incredible because this is weeks ahead of time, before any of us had any even thought about the election going past election night. Again, they knew what was going to happen. And this is setting up the perfect execution plan for all of them to steal the election. Here we go. January 6, 2021. Congress and the Electoral College count. On January 3rd, each newly elected or re-elected member of the Senate and House of Representatives is sworn in and seated, and the 117th Congress begins. It's the 117th Congress, not the current Congress, which meets on January 6th in a joint session held in the House chamber to count the Electoral College vote and choose the next president. The current Vice President, Mike Pence, presides over this joint session. The best case scenario is the count in Congress is largely ceremonial, as it has been. That's an interesting one that I just noticed, is that what they say here is that it's largely ceremonial, which is what they ended up changing the law to afterwards. They ended up changing the law to it being ceremonial afterwards. The best case scenario is that the count in the Congress is largely ceremonial, as it has been in presidential elections going back for over a century, and the candidate who legitimately won the election is awarded the most Electoral College votes. This is an interesting piece because ceremonial is what they tried to say his role was, for sure. They tried to say that it was illegal. He couldn't reject fraudulently slated electors. He had a ceremonial role. They sold it like that in the mainstream media. It doesn't matter what the truth is, what the Constitution said. What they sold to the public is that what Mike Pence could have been doing was not possible. It was illegal. So that's pretty wild. But we must prepare for other scenarios, including a Republican state legislature sends a competing slate of electors to Congress, forcing Congress to choose between the Democratic governor's slate of electors and a Republican legislature's slate of electors, or to discard both of them. In a state that Biden won and in which state officials, including the legislature, certify Biden as the winner through a legitimate process, Trump electors meet, vote for Trump, and then send a record of their vote to Congress. Congress must then decide whether to accept one of the slates or discard both of them. That is in the scenario in which the illegally changed election procedures and the mail-in ballot scheme cause these legislatures to reject the fraudulently slated electors and cast a new slate. If public opinion is overwhelmingly on our side, it's more likely that the law will be interpreted in a way that prevents Trump from stealing the election. Again, this is talking to the media allies. If public opinion is overwhelmingly on our side, it's more likely that the law will be interpreted in a way that prevents Trump from stealing the election. Public opinion, they're pointing to the media. Sway public perception. They've got Hollywood and entertainment. They've got all of these activists screaming and hollering that this is illegal, out of control. Trump is trying to steal the presidency. In a contested election, Republicans in Congress won't give a thought to the valid interpretation of the law or norms of congressional conduct. They're setting it up, man. Democrats and their allies prefer to hold themselves above the political fray in situations like this, delegating the fight to their legal teams while making proclamations about letting the process work. If Democrats act like legal scholars while Republicans fight a guerrilla war to make Trump the president at any cost, Democrats will risk losing a presidency despite winning the majority of electoral votes at the polls. Now's where we get in the juice. Democrats have to understand two things to win a fight over the electors in Congress. First, Republicans will not compromise. They will not act in good faith, give any consideration to national unity or stability of the country, or attempt to follow the law. Their only objective will be to win at any cost. Second, in a battle of political will and raw power, whoever rallies the American people to their side will have a huge advantage in how the inside game plays out. So whoever rallies the American public perception to their side, that's really easy when you own the mainstream media and the platforms, Twitter at the time. If tens of millions of Americans protest, strike, commit mass civil disobedience, and demand an end to the Trump regime, Republicans will have a much harder time exploiting arcane processes to make Trump president, either through a vote in Congress or ruling by the Supreme Court. And we're going to move on a couple of paragraphs. The legitimacy of a democracy rests on the consent of the governed. If Trump and the Republicans try to destroy democracy and reorganize our government as an autocracy, our job is to withdraw that consent and shut the country down. We have to make it clear that if Trump usurps the presidency, he won't be able to govern or remain in office for long. Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress must commit themselves to this strategy and rally the American people. If, like Gore in 2000, they urge the public to stand down and wait for the legal process to play out, Trump will have the advantage. We can't treat a congressional fight over which Electoral College votes to count like a legitimate legal process. It's a coup, and we must act accordingly. Democrats in Congress must use every constitutional, procedural, and political means necessary to delegitimize Trump's attempt to usurp the presidency, up to and including voting in unison against any Republican effort to count Trump's Electoral College votes, ordering the Sergeant-at-Arms to remove Republicans from the House chamber, boycotting the Electoral College count, and staging protests inside the Capitol to make it physically impossible for Congress to meet. Again, why were there FBI agents dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol prior to the doors opening? Let me read this to you one more time. Democrats in Congress must use every constitutional, procedural, and political means necessary to delegitimize Trump's attempt to usurp the presidency, up to and including voting in unison, so on, and staging protests inside the Capitol to make it physically impossible for Congress to meet, to make it impossible for Mike Pence to reject the fraudulently slated electors. That's what this was about. January 6th was about preventing Mike Pence from actually rejecting the electors. That's what we were there for, was to support Mike Pence. We were there to support Mike Pence in making that very difficult decision because there was a lot of pressure from the mainstream media in the other direction. The mainstream media and big tech was full force, full-blown censoring one side, censoring our side, while also pushing that Trump was doing something illegal. Mike Pence was doing something illegal. When in reality, with the mail-in ballots and the whole scheme, they were stealing the presidency. If Democrats in Congress can't win the fight to count Biden's lawfully chosen electors, then its strategy should be to delay the count and, if possible, prevent it from ever being completed. If the votes haven't been counted by January 20th, then Nancy Pelosi will be sworn in as the acting president. But that's not what happened. What happened was the riot ensued. Mike Pence then came back and certified the election, no questions asked. And that's what they were hoping would happen. We hope that none of this ever happens, but if it does, even defeating Trump will badly damage our democracy. Repairing the damage will require a long period of national healing and reform to correct the flaws in our system that made it possible for an autocrat to attempt to overturn the results of an election. But anything is preferable to allowing Trump to seize the presidency by force. Action steps once the fight moves to Congress. Come down here a little bit. Organize and participate in mass civil disobedience at the Capitol. Lead public in staging mass civil disobedience protests in the Capitol with the goal of making it impossible for Congress to meet or vote. It's right there, plain as day. That is talking to the pillar of activists that might act a little disobedient. Biden must not concede. Refer to Trump as a would-be autocrat, not a candidate. Do not grant Trump legitimacy by referring to him as a candidate. If the fight moves to Congress, we are fending off a coup by Trump and his allies and not settling a legitimate dispute over a presidential election. Shut down the country. For people everywhere, shut down the country. As the fight moves to Congress, we have to bring the country to a complete halt with massive protests, civil disobedience, and strikes, and we must remain in the streets and engage in mass civil disobedience until Trump is removed from the White House. That didn't happen because the riot worked. They didn't have to shut down the country and call on the military to remain neutral and reject illegal orders. It didn't get past that because the riot that they orchestrated worked. And when I say it was orchestrated, this isn't something new to the military-industrial complex. And this is why you see General Milley got a pardon and Trump took his photo off the wall. General Milley is where this all leads, okay? The military-industrial complex, they have a playbook to overthrow regimes in other countries by doing exactly what they did on January 6th. Public perception was swayed. We are in an information war, and not only did it serve as stopping the electors, but the riot served as an entrapment of innocent Trump supporters who were attacked by police. I was there. The police started attacking the crowd. That happened. Whether you want to believe it or not, that happened. They entrapped innocent Trump supporters. They got incredible images. Antifa caused a lot of chaos and created quite the imagery for the mainstream media to use. The mainstream media started pushing out the propaganda. Very, very selective edits, only few videos, only certain angles, and big tech is where we were being censored and our stuff wasn't getting out. We were unable to defend ourselves. All of us. We were unable to defend ourselves, and then we had the DOJ coming after us hard. The FBI, everybody started coming after J6ers, and it was terrifying and terrible. The financial system was enacted. People's bank accounts, they started going through the Google photos of people that were there that day and geolocation maps and following people that spent any kind of money in January 6th in D.C. If you used your credit card, you were being looked at. They started exercising every single pillar against the American people. They entrapped innocent Americans, and they used the full force of every pillar of government and the deep state that they have. Call it deep state, establishment, blob, whatever you want to call it. It was all turned against us. The censorship, the DOJ lawfare, the media was just demonizing us. The financial system, debanking people. The activists were out calling us terrorists in conjunction and lockstep with the media. The intelligence community, the FBI was terrifying. It was the largest operation that the FBI's ever had. Hollywood and entertainment, they got everybody to call us insurrectionists. They named the whole thing an insurrection. In conclusion, defending democracy. This may well be a street fight, not a legal battle. Technocratic solutions, courts, and a reliance on elites observing norms are not the answer here. A show of numbers in the streets and actions in the streets may be decisive factors in determining what the public perceives as a just and legitimate outcome. The Transition Integrity Project, Preventing a Disrupted Presidential Election and Transition, August 3rd, 2020. The Transition Integrity Project is worth its own deep dive because it's incredible. It's an incredible piece of this whole puzzle. It was formed in late 2019, a year before the election, and it was 100 legal scholars and experts about the election. You had generals from the military-industrial complex, big tech people, you had media journalists and news anchors, you had DOJ, legal scholars, lawfare experts, academia, education. You had 100 people come together and run an election simulation against Biden versus Trump, and they went over different scenarios in which the election ended up, the outcome of the election, and one of them was Biden winning a narrow victory, and the election night results being contested because the mail-in ballots come in late, and Donald Trump then tries to overthrow the election. It's just incredible how they planned for the exact scenario and wrote a playbook on how to defend against Donald Trump, contesting this fraudulent election. So it's just an incredible dive because once you get into the funding of it, it's like, whoa. Just like the funding of this, it leads to the same place, the same billionaires, NGOs, political action committees, all of it. And this is worth a dive into. In the next video, I'll go over where all of this is funded and who it leads to, all that stuff, because it's incredible. And it really makes you just say, wow, it finally makes sense. It finally all makes sense. And that's kind of the relief that I find when I dig into all this stuff. At least it all makes sense. Frustrating, but at least it all makes sense. And we have an answer, and we can put our finger on the culprit. As we write this, it seems likely that Biden will defeat Trump in a landslide. If that happens, Trump will have little choice but to accept the results of the election. He may not go quietly, but he'll go. If Biden wins a narrow victory and Trump tries to overturn the results, we have to be psychologically prepared to act quickly and decisively, and we have to have a plan. We encourage you to share this guide with your friends, family, and community to read it together and to decide now what you can do if Trump and his allies refuse to accept the results of the election. We've painted a bleak picture of post-election mayhem and subversion of democracy, but we can't afford to feel hopeless. Americans have faced greater challenges to our democracy, overcome them, and built stronger, more democratic institutions. Trump is weak and lacks political support. That's why he's losing. The only way he can win is if we don't understand the threat we face and we abandon the political playing field after November 3rd, and we rely on the courts, laws, norms, and congressional procedure to save us. We all have a part to play. Elected officials at every level of government must do their part to ensure that we have a fair and free election. Speak out if Trump tries to disrupt the election, and side with and protect pro-democracy protesters. The rest of us have to make sure they do their jobs and protest by the tens of millions and stay in the streets until Trump leaves office. America is a democracy because people have fought throughout its history to make it one. There's never been a time when our country wasn't threatened from within by people who prefer autocracy and oppression to democracy and freedom. We've defeated them before, we'll do it again. This is straight up talking to the activists on the ground, the Antifa and the political activists on the ground. It's talking to the media here, public perception about what the public thinks about the whole situation. It's talking about being psychologically prepared. This is a battle playbook. And the way that all of this was put together was just incredible. And I'll go over that in the follow-up video to this one, because when you start digging into where this all comes from, who did it, where does the funding come from, it really opens your mind, but it gives you that peace of mind knowing I can put a finger on what is going on here. Who's doing this? Who's pulling the strings? When you don't have all that information, it can be very overwhelming, and it was for a lot of years, but this was a huge piece of the puzzle for us, and I want to thank Millie Weaver, Millennial Millie, who actually uncovered this document first. She spent a lot of hours sitting in their Zoom calls and infiltrating their chats and all that stuff, and paying attention to this with a close eye. And she's the first one that brought this to my attention. And I want to thank her for that. But it is just a piece of the puzzle. Huge piece, but a piece of the puzzle. The Transition Integrity Project is another humongous piece of the puzzle. Might be even bigger. And it answers a lot more questions as to where this all comes from. I hope you follow along. I hope you learned something. But if there's any questions, if you want to call me crazy, please comment it. Call me crazy in the comments. That'd be great. As you can tell, this whole thing is a lot more organized than many of us ever imagined. I was there on January 6th. I felt it. I know what I saw. I saw these things that didn't make sense. And it threw me into a deep, deep spiral of trying to figure out what's going on. This document and this playbook is just a piece of the puzzle. There's so much more to this whole operation. But when you finally start to understand that these people have organized against us, it all starts to make sense. And we can finally put a finger on who's doing it, where it's coming from, especially when you dig into the funding of all this. January 6th wasn't just an attack on Trump and his supporters. It was an attack on all of America, all Americans, everybody that has voting power, that has a voice, because they censored us. They threw us in prison. They used the DOJ against us to use us as political pawns in their narrative battle in the media. They cut our finances off. They used every aspect of their system against us. They put activists on the streets to call us terrorists. It's not just J6ers. It's not just Trump supporters. It's every American was attacked that day. And that's the importance of understanding all this, because January 6th and the stolen election is what's going to take them down. They stole an election from the American people, and they planned it. They schemed it. They released a bioweapon to help them. These people have been in power for a long time, and they don't want to give up power. And that's why it feels like the fight that we're still in, because these people are still fighting. And your brain, what your brain believes, is the battleground. To summarize this, January 6th was not just a random riot. It was a very well crafted and planned out, meticulously executed riot used for multiple purposes. Number one being stopping the count and solidifying the stolen election. 2, prevent Trump from ever running again. Not only did they not want him to run again, they wanted to punish Americans and quell dissent. They wanted to make examples out of us so that the rest of America could know not to speak up. It served all those purposes. And they used the media, they used the DOJ, the lawfare, academia, big tech, the military-industrial complex. They used Hollywood and entertainment, the intelligence community, the financial system. Every pillar of the deep state was in full force against the American people because of January 6th. So January 6th was an excuse to push forth an agenda to prevent us from ever having our man, or making it so that we're scared of sending our man back to power, electing a president of the people. These people have had power over our country for a very long time, and they did not want to give it up then. They still don't want to give it up, and that's why it still feels like the fight that we're in.
We the people, we the people, we the people.